Hello everyone. Can you all hear me well? Okay,
Hi,
wonderful. Okay, wonderful. I'm very glad to see so many of you here today. It is we're very happy to be here today. Just a brief moment, I would like to share my screen. So a couple of seconds just for setting up the presentation. Okay. And I do, if anyone can give me just like a heads up that they can see my screen well and everything is working well. Okay, perfect.
If you would like to go into presenter mode, but whatever you are comfortable with.
Say that again, please.
No, you're perfect. You got it.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm very glad that technology is cooperating with us today, even though we're using it for a while. You never know. So that's a very good sign. I do want to congratulate again the winner. It seems like a very good day for you. So congratulations again. So Dr. Silagi and myself are really honored to be here today. We understand this is a very, very special event. This is a conference that is organized for, I understand this is the 15th year. This is the 15th time, right, that you organize. So it is, yes, 15 years. Organized by East Texas Food Bank, and we are honored to be here with you all today. So thank you for inviting us. I would like to recognize that today we have a wonderful and very special group of people. I am very excited to see such a big number of you attending this conference. So it is a very special group of people that you all share at least one important element. And you do, and that's that you all find some sense of meaning and purpose in helping others. Whether you're volunteering, helping directly others, whether you're in the leadership team, where you're administrative, you choose actively to dedicate your time, your energy, some of you, your careers, to helping those in need. And not only that you choose to do that, but you find a sense of purpose and meaning. But doing all this, it's really not an easy thing to do, and it comes with some drawbacks. And specifically, when we think about the last year, right? And the last year and a half, I would argue, it's really has been very challenging for all of us. It is a unique moment in history, and probably we'll talk about the world before the pandemic and the world after the pandemic. It took us all by surprise. We were all taken, it was something unexpected. But the fact that such a big number of you all are here today, that says a lot about your abilities, your strength, your courage, and your ability to go through difficult situation and surpass that. And why am I saying all this? Is that this is, so the next 45 minutes or so will be dedicated exactly talking about this thing. So we, Dr. Silagi and myself, we're going to talk about being a giver and the burnout, and how do we navigate all this during a pandemic, right? A very, very difficult and challenging, unique moment in our history that we all gone through. So with that being said, just a little bit about us. So my name is Ramona Grad. I'm originally from Romania, and I currently work as an assistant professor at University of Texas at Tyler. I'm teaching courses in a clinical mental health counseling program. So basically, I'm working with individuals like you, with students that were very intentional about choosing a career to help others. I also have extended experience as a clinician and a supervisor, worked over 15 years in Romania and in the US with adults in multiple settings. My clinical and research experience and the reason why I'm here today is because my specialty and my expertise lies in trauma and post-traumatic growth. I also dedicate a lot of time working with supervisees, so with students who are training to become counselors, and the burnout and the compassion fatigue, and that comes with being a helper and being a giver. And with this, I'm going to invite Dr. Silagi to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's, as my colleague, Dr. Grad, mentioned, it's a tremendous honor for us to be here and actually to learn a little bit about your community. I'm also, my full name is Andreea Silagi. I'm originally from Romania, and I have been involved with the creation of academic programs, standards of practice, and certification programs for counselors in 12 countries in Europe, Asia, and the United States. For 15 years, I was in charge with the international department of the biggest counseling certification organization in the world, which allowed me to get in touch with caregiver communities in those 3 continents. So being a counselor myself and educated counselors, being involved in the caregiver communities, I'm pretty familiar with the individual and community impact of stress and to the human response to stress. Right now I teach at the University of Bucharest, Romania, and I'm involved with leadership programs with a research company in Research Institute in Germany. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Dr. Silagi. And with this, if you allow me, I'm just going to go briefly over how we structured our time today to give you an idea about what we're going to talk about. So just briefly, not that you don't know, but just to emphasize kind of like the population that you're directly working in, the situation that is the hunger in East Texas. Dr. Silagi will talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the physical and specifically on mental health level. Then I'm going to introduce what the literature talks about, the model of victim, survivor, thriver. So just briefly present that, and we'll spend a great deal of time on sharing with you all some practical tools, some things that you can do individually, maybe with a good friend, a partner, your peers, some things that you can apply, because again, everything that we've gone through was not easy at all. It was very challenging. We didn't know what to do. Some tools to take with you, to use however you see it fit. And we're going to talk about the fact that, yes, adverse experiences may happen, unexpected things may happen, and we don't have, unfortunately, control over those, but we do have, to a certain extent, of course, a possibility to choose our responses. And there is actually healing, and not only healing that can happen after trauma and adverse experience, but also growth. And I do want to emphasize the fact that we dedicated time at the end for question, comments, or anything that you would like to add, maybe reactions. So we have about 5-10 minutes at the end dedicated for that. And we don't mind being interrupted. If you have a question that is related to what we're talking about and we can provide further clarification, we can do that as well. You can use the because I'm sharing my screen, it is very hard if someone raises their hand just like electronically. So probably the best option is to use the chat. And we will do our best to address all the questions that you might have. So hunger in East Texas, you all know that this is a real thing, right? And it's really impacting. And I only live in East Texas area, so I moved at UT Tyler about 3 years ago. And I do want to share that the very first thing that I heard is that I'm going to meet and work with wonderful people. They're really they're very intentional about feeling you welcome and part of the community. Yet I've heard about the hunger that it's present in East Texas. So I'm sure I'm not saying anything new, and we don't want to teach you things that you already very know, but just to really emphasize that the big number and how at what level the community that it's right near us is impacted it's pretty impressive. So just some statistics: Texas has the 7th highest food insecurity rate in the nation. And also 1 in 5 East Texans, including 1 in 4 children, are facing hunger. Now, if we think about this, there's just like every day, this is really, really challenging, right? We're thinking about basic needs are not met. If we add to that the level of, if we add to that the unexpected, the lack of control that we all experienced during the pandemic, we can imagine how hard it was for this community to, the past year. And as in all situations, unfortunately, always the most vulnerable are impacted the most. What we want to say with this is that we know that you are working with individuals who feel extremely, extremely vulnerable. And that will make sense why we talk about these things, right? Because everything that is so vulnerable and you have direct impact with that as a giver, as someone that wants to help, no matter what, that has an impact on you as well, right? On all the levels. And Dr. Sila, you will talk about this more in detail. So it's vulnerable population. This is unfortunately the reality. And also this has increased and it's really picked in the last 1.5 years with the pandemic. At the same time, I wonder if any of you are where this number might represent. And I'm going to help with that just for the sake of time. We know that through East Texas Food Bank, all of you together as a group, you touch the lives of over 250,000 citizens in 111,200. I'm not saying it right. So yeah, 111,208 households in East Texas. This is a really, really meaningful impact. This is so impressive when you think about these numbers. So you provide all the things that you do are touching the lives of the community right next to you through all the things that you do, right? So the nutrition education, the social justice, by exactly helping those in need, the children, the working poor, the seniors. We're aware that about a few hours ago that Hunger Action Day took place, right? So there are things that you do constantly. And probably the most impactful, the most meaningful impact that you do is that you really touch those in need. And how you do that is that through that human connection. You see the humans behind the struggles and you create those connections. And again, They're impactful for those in need, but they're also impacting you. So I'm going to invite Dr. Silagi to share a little bit more about what this all has meant for all of us, specifically in the last year.
Thank you, Dr. Grad. We will talk a little bit about stress, and the intention of this discussion is not to add more stress to your already perceived level of, discomfort related to this whole phenomenon of, COVID pandemic, but let's see where we all are, because, and I would mention Kaiser Family Foundation poll that found that in March 2020, about 1/3 of the US adults said that worry and stress related to the coronavirus pandemic was having a negative impact on their mental health. So this 1/3 population went to almost a half a year later. In March 2021, half of the adults continue to report negative mental health impacts related to worry or stress from the pandemic. And this stress, we will see later, but it affects us on many levels. Some levels we're not even aware of, and some levels we think we can control, and some levels are, some aspects are out of our control. This pandemic increased the hunger in East Texas, and it hit the most vulnerable neighbors the hardest, as Dr. Grad mentioned. Food access was seriously impacted in many ways. Seniors couldn't safely go to grocery stores. Children lost their free and reduced meal plans. Parents and college students lost their jobs. The pandemic impacted volunteers, the pantry partners, all the procedures that before were in place, many of them had to be changed, and also increased fear response in all of us. The pandemic affects us personally and at the community level, and it is really difficult to expect that we can escape its influence, and no matter how much we try to shelter ourselves and our loved ones. In the next slide, we will see that some information about how we are positioned, and we can see how the low-income families suffered the most in those times. And now, if we move further, I would like to talk to you about a research study that actually talks about a COVID stress syndrome already. So this pandemic-related adjustment disorders was already identified, and it usually manifests in distinct ways. You will see everything on the slide. But I would mention out of all those ways that you will see on the slide, Dr. Grad, we will mention the fear of socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic, which adults report as being the worst. And here we can think about job loss, or losing family and friends, or kids not being able to go to school, changing their ways of living, needing electronic equipment at home, all those implications that were not in our attention before. So we see that this pandemic, this fear affects us on many levels, from getting in touch with objects and services that we think they're contaminated, to information overload. You could be surrounded by information 24 hours a day, from TV, radio, newspaper, social media, all of you informing about the numbers of the COVID infections. Greater severity of the COVID stress syndrome was associated with younger age, female gender, unemployment status, low educational attainment, Asian and Hispanic communities, a current or previous diagnosis of COVID-19, that's scary, right? And pre-existing mood or anxiety disorder. So as we see again, the most disadvantaged were hit, at the highest level. And we all know that to a certain extent, the situation impacted us all. The key is, how do we respond to that? And in the next slide, we will talk a little bit about, what is stress, what is crisis, what is trauma, because the common denominator of all this situation with the COVID is actually related to two elements. They're very, very powerful. One is fear of death, right? This is, if you go to the essence, what is this about? It's fear of death, that my death or losing someone that I love. And then the second element that is extremely stressful and extremely powerful is uncertainty. Uncertainty is above the levels we're used to before. We may be unsure about our personal health, about the health of loved ones. We might be unsure about our job, our money, where we go to get groceries, and so on. So, and there are numbers of ways that our body and mind show stress, and we all know them, and it's important for us to be able to identify them. Some common ways are, emotionally, we might feel increased anxiety, fear, grief, irritability, or sadness, or physically, that might include eating and sleeping problems, tension, or fatigue. Even in our thinking, we might witness ourselves having racing thoughts, worrying a lot, persisting in those worries, and negative thinking. Behaviors, this might include avoidance. We try to avoid certain places or certain people. Social withdrawal, we try to isolate ourselves. Seeking reassurance all the time, excessively checking news, and so on and so forth. And stress, there are thousands of books that were written about stress. There's lots of research studies, but we try to go to the essence. Stress is what we feel when we face a new and or uncertain situation, right? This is normal, this is healthy, and we have to think about stress, crisis, trauma, and chronic stress as existing along a continuum. We are all equipped to cope with daily stress. The situation becomes complicated when we talk about chronic stress, which in the long run could lead to crisis or burnout. On another hand, trauma is an experience that causes a person to feel extremely afraid, overwhelmed, out of control, or even broken, right? Trauma affects how people view themselves, others, and the world around them. So it affects our view about our world. It is a scary situation that threatens our safety to the point that we're extremely afraid, and our body and mind sometimes enter survival mode. And what is important for us to be aware of is that there is another element in all this story that is usually related to caregivers' activities, because we might experience what is called a secondary traumatic stress, which is related to stress reactions and symptoms resulting from exposure to another individual's traumatic experiences. And I'm sure that all of you have been there, experiencing, witnessing someone else's stress and taking it over. So all this in a chronic, prolonged situation could lead to burnout, that feeling of extreme exhaustion and being overwhelmed. In a few minutes, Dr. Grad will elaborate on the topic of trauma and recovery from trauma. But on the next slide, we will talk about what we do, because this is why me is the most natural and human reaction to stress or a crisis situation. Why me is very, very normal, because now we experience a social crisis that is reflected at a personal level. We cannot really escape that. And there is this whole spectrum of stress associated with this pandemic, from the uncertainty to crisis situation, getting sick, contemplating death, losing a loved one. For many ways, for many of us, the entire way of living has been changed. The traditional 9-to-5 way of working is gone for many. Some of us lost their paycheck. Kids stay home and attend school online. We're all forced to acquire skills we didn't even think about before. And I would say not the last, a very important aspect as caregivers, we get in contact with many other people. They're also affected by the pandemic, as we talked. And in an effort to support and help, we get intoxicated by their pain and grief. So now more than ever, we need to talk about this compassion fatigue that we mentioned, which is a condition that involves physical, emotional exhaustion leading to diminished ability to empathize or feeling compassion about others. So, for caregivers, this is described as representing the negative cost of caring and is considered to be a form of secondary traumatic stress. And all that and many more could make us feel overwhelmed and wonder, why me? So the solution is to acknowledge that although this is a normal reaction, this is a natural and a sane reaction. The essential is essential for us to move towards this stage. And Dr. Grad will talk about it.
Yes, although I do want to emphasize how natural is this response of why me, right? This is a human response. This is our body response, our brains, our everything, our whole, just the nature of being humans. And this is doubled by the fact that all of you, right, we all come back to this idea that you chose to dedicate your careers, your time, your resources, your energy, your afternoons, your Sundays to helping others. But you did all this in the last year when all of them, they were so impacted, as we talked about. So it almost, you experience your own stress and your own why and the loss of a sense of control, in addition to witnessing all this in the ones that you chose to help. So it's really, we do want you to stick with this idea that it's a natural and human response, and this is how we operate. Now, a lot of you, our guess is that, so I'm seeing over 100 people, and I'm sure probably others would have joined if they could. The fact that you're all here today, the fact that you attended an entire day of conference, I'm seeing some of you have others around, you're all, you have a sense of connection with somewhere around, or just with the community at large. The fact you're all here today is telling us both that you already passed that response of why me, and now you're in this, not only now, but even maybe earlier in this, okay, now what, right? So the pandemic came, it was all this like, why me? A sense of control was lost. You lost maybe loved ones. You all experienced your own losses in addition to witnessing. But then you think about, okay, so now what do we do with this? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this because, as Dr. Silagi mentioned, as a consequence to a traumatic event or an adverse experience or a disaster, like the pandemic was at the world level. So yes, we can respond with chronic stress, with crisis, with trauma, but also we know from the literature that also any sort of adverse experience provides an opportunity for growth. And we want you to just spend a little bit of time and pay a little bit of energy on this, right? So there is this why me, but there is also this opportunity for healing and growing from an adverse experience. And briefly, because we could talk about this for hours, and we would love to hear from you as well. So I'm going to briefly go over this model. So again, as Dr. Silagi mentioned, it is a human natural response to first respond as the literature talks about from a victim position. But this is part of the healing journey. And one of the key elements, and we're going to come back to this just a little bit later, is to embrace that and to understand that, yes, it is okay that I'm responding. Why me? Why now? Why is this happening? And kind of question maybe our own values and the whole purpose of life. So it is normal. I wouldn't say the problem, but maybe it's just, it starts to get in the way of normal functioning is when we get stuck in that place. And we don't move to what the literature talks about being a survivor, which is that we start to integrate whatever is happening and kind of, making friends with that, right? And say, yes, this is the pandemic. At the beginning, we all responded, I would guess, we all said, how come we all maybe were frozen by the unexpected, the uncontrolled, that were taken by surprise. Maybe we didn't believe, so denial is very normal. But then with time, we kind of make it part of our lives, right? And that's part of being a survivor. So making friends with whatever that enemy, if you will, is that we perceive at the beginning, right? So we started integrating. And being a thriver, the last stage in this model is actually not only healing and understand that, yes, this is an unexpected event that happened. We made it part of our lives, but maybe we started seeing life in a different way. And not only life, but also ourselves, others, our work, our relationships, our whole entire system, our value system, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail. So again, it's normal, why me? But then we want to, let's see what we can do about moving through all these stages. The last 10 minutes, we're going to, before we invite you all to pose some questions, we're going to talk about what it's called the post-traumatic growth. This is a construct, it's a model. Clinicians and we both, Dr. Silagi and myself, were using this when we work with students, clients, supervisees, is that we're looking at, okay, so this is what happened. It's okay, why me? It's part of your life. Now, what we can do to heal and grow from this. And the researchers talk about this post-traumatic growth. Basically, they noticed by working with people, by talking with others, is that people do report growth in these 5 areas of life: personal strength, new possibilities, relationship with others, appreciation of life, and spiritual change. You have, and we're happy to share more with this if needed, but I'm going to move forward because we're going to talk in detail about each one of this aspect. So the very first is finding your own strength. Again, I do want to emphasize the fact that you're all here today. That says something about your strengths and the ability to focus on your strengths in adverse experiences. Now, we want you to become intentional about that, right? Because you all have that within yourselves, and maybe you use it naturally, but from today, you're going to be very intentional. And what do we know is that, again, Dr. Silagi mentioned about this, it is okay to respond, to feel anger, to feel irritated, to feel sad, to feel frustrated, to feel hopeless. Embrace those feelings and say, I'm feeling worried. And I would argue, take a piece of paper and say, I'm afraid that I might die, and write that down. Why do we say that? Because once you write that fear down, or if you write whatever is that feeling that you might experience at that specific moment, it just feels a little bit more real. It's almost like you can touch it. And it's something that you can do something about that. It gives you a sense of, oh, so I have fear and it's okay to feel that. And you can do that for yourself. And maybe you already done that. I say the fact that you're here today tells me that yes, but from today, be intentional about that. So it's okay to feel your feelings. We know that only what we feel can be healed. If we avoid through all the behaviors, we're very creative about doing that, we cannot heal, right? So it's feel angry, it's okay to feel anger, maybe write it down and recognize that you're all here today because of your inner strength. You're unique, and all those strengths, you have that within you. From today, you're going to be aware of that and recognize that in an intentional way. So one simple thing that you can do, take a piece of paper, acknowledge your feelings, write those down, and maybe even write one of the strengths that you can do that by the end of today. Identify one strength that made you be here with us all today, despite all the difficulty experienced. Dr. Silagi.
Yes. So speaking about find new possibilities in life, that's difficult, especially when we're very stressed. But basically, this is where we switch from why me to what now, right? So it's a point where we intentionally try to leave the past behind and look into the future, although we know that that future is very uncertain. That was then, what can I do now? So I would invite you to pause for a moment, to take a step back, contemplate one situation that bothers you, that is related to this whole situation, to detach and imagine ways to cope. And, then start planning and start preparing for the future from a detachment position, not getting involved, not being involved, not staying stressed. What are your priorities? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be in a year? What can be done? So, a very, very common advice is to write down in a diary, make an intentional effort to one time per day, maybe at the end of the day, to think about that task and think about what can I do to move forward. It's okay not to be successful in the beginning. And it's because this is an acquired skill. Not everybody, not all of us have it. So this is my invitation to think about, contemplate new possibilities in life by stepping out of that position of fear and being frozen. Mm-hmm. Dr. Grad, do you want to go further and talk about relationships?
Yes. So I invite you to think about when all this started. So probably my memory tells me that it was sometimes in March 2020 when everything started, the craziness started, right? Or we became aware that we're not going to escape whatever was happening. Now, I would argue that many of you here in that time of stress, you naturally went up, took an effort, and probably the very first thing that you did, and this is something that we all do, even when we're babies, is that we search for human connection, human contact, right? Maybe you talked with somebody in your family about this, a very good friend. You went to church and you talked with the community, just like whatever is outside, however you define that community. And we all started to talk about these things, right? Why? So again, we all have that within ourselves. But from now on, we want you to do that in an intentional way. Why do we do that? Because the research tells us that stress brings people together. And not only, but when we go through stress together, that actually really increases that human connection. And we start to look at relationship, not just, they're just there in life, but we're looking at relationship as a way to survive and thrive. Right? Follow me on that. So we're intentional about that. We have that within us. This is part of being humans, to reach out and connect. But we want you all from now on, whether you feel isolated or just like overwhelmed with whatever is happening, reach out and talk with somebody, because we know that helps. Just by talking about those things that you're experiencing, in addition to writing about that in a journal or acknowledging that it's okay to feel this way, is to talk with others about this and think about relationships as a way through to go and to move into responding from a why me to actually heal and grow. And do that in everyday lives when you interact with those in need and those that you help. And now Dr. Silag will talk about the fourth area, which is the appreciation of life.
Thank you. So this is about something that we all knew. It's either from the TV or the, positive psychology. We get this message all the time: stop and appreciate life. Well, neuropsychology tells us that when we're stressed, when we are worried, it is almost impossible to switch and to think about, something nice or positive. So that said, appreciating life becomes a very, very important skill, and we have to train it, and some of us might even, we might never done this before, because not in an intentional manner. We never thought about it before, right? Now more than ever, this is crucial, and we need to take the time to notice and appreciate the little things in life that bring us maybe not happiness, but at least peace, right? Again, could prove difficult, especially when we go through prolonged stress, a crisis, or a traumatic event. One simple way to do it is to plan for such moments. For the example, at the end of the day, you can write down one thing that brought you peace. You can write down in your diary, and even if you don't feel like, try to go through the effort to go to that place where you feel that, being grateful. And neuropsychology tells us that in time, we build this as a muscle, and we will be able to actually start to notice it more and to get into this almost automatic habit. But again, if you cannot do it at first, again, this is a normal reaction. When in pain, it becomes problematic to appreciate, right, the good parts of life. It takes time and persistence, and please do not blame yourselves. Be kind to yourselves, and even if you don't succeed at first, and if you don't succeed today, try again tomorrow. And good luck with this. This is our little homework for you.
Yes, yeah, a lot of things to do, right? But you don't have to do them all. Ideas, and that's something that I actually want to emphasize. It's not one size fits all. You take whatever fits where you are right now in this moment in your need, right? So please make this journey yours. Very, very important. The last thing, very importantly, that I'm going to talk about is that people and individuals do report change on spiritual level. And what does that mean? Is that, so if we look back at this time, again, starting March 2020, we were put in a place where we were not prepared for. We were never experienced anything like this before, right? And it's an opportunity. You might ask, okay, so we thought about what, why me, what do we do with all this? But then also it gave us time to reflect, time to think about, ask our, what we call the, just like the existential question, what the research talks about. I know that I found myself asking what's the purpose of our life? Like when when we're isolated, because at the beginning, the restrictions were so intense, right? We couldn't go anywhere. So we ask ourselves all this, like, where do I come from? Where I am now? What is the purpose of everything that is happening? Do I practice what I preach? What do I do better for my community? So all these things that some of us, we give ourselves the chance to reflect on, but I would say that not so much, because we're all very busy. So it gave us all this time and opportunity to sit back and reflect on all these questions about whatever is and however you define, and maybe you reached out more to your religious community or however you define that spiritual community, and think about life just in a very, very different way. So this is what we have prepared for you today, and I'm going to, yes, Dr. Silagi, please, I interrupted you.
No, you didn't, because at this point, we would like to invite you to ask questions or pose a comment if there is anything you'd like us to elaborate on. I think we have time for one question, but nevertheless, on the last slide or on our presentation, you will find our email addresses. And we both hope that this is not the end. This is the beginning of a dialogue. And if you have thoughts about it or personal experiences that you like to share, we can be found those email addresses at any time. But right now, if there is any comment we can take, or a question or some specific detail experience you would like to talk about. Well, I don't see any hand raised. Dr. Grad?
I don't see.
Okay.
Yes, I do see. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're happy to take a question or comment.
Yeah, hey, this is Tim Butler, at the food bank. So I just think it's really interesting how just the normal stress level of not being able to provide just some of your basic needs like hunger, how it would affect the clients that we serve every day. But then the pandemic on top of that, I think I've personally witnessed it at some of the distributions, and we do it few and far between compared to some of the partners on this call. Just like maybe an elevated anxiety that you guys discussed, and you nailed it. You hit it right on the head. Maybe the aggressiveness potentially, but it's a human reaction, like you guys said, and the way that you discussed that and laid that out for us was really insightful, and just helped me realize the empathy that we need to provide.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So it's an absolute human response. You said it so well. But also to acknowledge that the good response is empathy, but it's also for those of you who are in direct contact, to understand that it's asking a lot of you, and being gentle with yourselves, and being okay with being angry, or being okay with just like having some rough days. That's, again, it's part of being humans. There's nothing wrong with any of that, right?
And there is one thing that we would like, among many other things we would like you to take home with you, is that you've been so used to give, to offer support and help, that sometimes the very simple act of asking for help doesn't come natural to you. And many caregivers report that, like they feel embarrassed, like they feel like they need to find their ways on their own. So this sense of community that we talked about needs to be stronger than ever now. If we don't help each other in both ways, in all the ways, we might not be in such a good shape in the end. So that's an invitation for all of you to connect and support each other.
And just one last thought, it's a resource that I wanted to emphasize. And if any of you we're happy to share our slides with the community. We did put some resources for any of you that you want to, because it is important to reach out and ask for help. That's totally okay. And we want to encourage you all to do that. And thank you, or I think 1 minute over time, so we apologize for that.